Hey guys, so today's video is dedicated to what I believe anyway is not just one of the most important things you can do for a writing project, but the most important thing that you can do for any writing project, regardless of the discipline, whether it's a work of fiction or if it's a piece of journalism, whatever it is. Research is the most important element. Now, I, having worked as a journalist, can fully appreciate the way it is led by deadlines, and there is always tight pressure. But I still say that that is no excuse for sloppy research or the lack of it. You can always tell a well-researched piece from an unresearched piece or a barely researched piece. I had wasn't necessarily a pleasure to read an article the other day about an actor who comes from quite an established acting family. His father's an actor, his mother's an actor, and away down the page, it showed him pictured next to Bill Murray. But it read in the caption, "Here is the actor such and such next to his father such and such, not Bill Murray." And to me, that just strikes me as the journalist's lack of research for actually getting that photo and not knowing the difference between this actor's rather famous father and the Hollywood actor Bill Murray. It just, that doesn't ring very well to me at all. And put me off reading the rest of the article, and indeed puts me off really reading the publication as a whole. It affects a reputation. So today's video gives a couple of tips for how you might research for a piece of work, primarily geared in this case towards fiction, of course, and apply that research to that creative work. So that's what we're going to explore right now. So the first point is to read non-fiction pieces, whether that's journal articles, newspaper reports, whatever, or books, of course. Do not skim read Wikipedia and call that research. It's a good starting point, admittedly, but it barely scratches the surface for sort of researching a subject in the level of depth that you need, I would say. You need to invest in some materials that explore what you're planning on writing about in much greater detail. For example, with my own work in progress, You Can Hear Chopin from the Attic, the war thriller, set in a hotel in Berlin, I decided it was necessary to understand how high society, those sorts of circles, moved during Nazi Germany during that time. And so I invested, it's not actually a very broadly explored subject, I admit, but I managed to find one book that I read from cover to cover, and it has been the pinnacle of helpfulness. It's this one. It's called High Society and the Third Reich, by Fabrice d'Almeida, and as I say, I read that from cover to cover, and as I was going, I made a list of points, not just interesting points from the historical context, but for things I thought could feasibly apply to You Can Hear Chopin's characters, its plot, the setting, and and we'll come on to that a little bit later in the video. The second point is speak to people. I know that what some of you may be thinking, that writing is a very solitary art. I shouldn't have to talk to people. That's the whole point I'm doing this. I don't want to talk to people. It is so helpful. I mean, coming from a journalistic background, interviewing people is sort of second nature to me by now. It wasn't when I first started, and I know a couple of people who have come into journalism from creative writing backgrounds and been quite shocked at how different a discipline it is, but it is. But I do say that for research purposes, you do need to know how to talk to people, because what better stories come from those who are actually there? What I'd give to be able to speak to a wartime hotelier who in Berlin right now, it would be fantastic research for You Can Hear Chopin. Talking to people is also good for inspiring characters and plot points, or indeed brand new stories, things that they are an impeccable source of inspiration, in my opinion. So I recommend, if you find talking to people difficult, but you want to learn to write and you want to research a subject, I would swallow your pride and try giving it a go. Practice makes perfect, I think, in terms of an interview setting, but definitely an invaluable asset to the research process for writing a book or an article or whatever. The third and final point, really, for this video anyway, is to read other works of fiction. Comparable works are one of your greatest allies in the research and writing process. My advice is, don't just stick to works in your exact genre. Look for period, look for character point of view. Think about when it was written compared to when it's set, and also who the author was. Could they have actually been there? Because I'm currently reading this one, Alone in Berlin, by Hans Verlade, as part of my ongoing research for You Can Hear Chopin. It's based on true events, for one thing. Published in 1947, shortly after the death of its author, but set in 1940. So there's only a 7-year gap, and indeed you wouldn't have been able to publish something like this during the war, of course. It just came out a couple of years after. I think it was one of the first works of fiction to come out of Germany that was sort of painting the Nazi regime in the light that it should have been painted in. You get a real sense, or I do anyway, as the reader, that the man writing it was genuinely there in Berlin at the time while the war was raging around, and so it's invaluable sort of capturing that tone and then adapting it for my work. So I say to follow a similar formula while researching your own works. Find things that are not only comparable, but think that you can sort of works from which you can sort of draw the tone, not necessarily the style, but the flavour. Now, my final advice, as I alluded before, as you're reading or interviewing or whatever you happen to be doing as part of your research process, write stuff down. Obviously record stuff if you are interviewing people or whatever, but yeah, keep a list. Make a list of points that you think will come of interest, will come in handy further down the development process. So then you go through your notes once you've done as much research as you feel is necessary, and then you inject that research into your story. Apply points to your characters. Allow events to drive your plots, and sort of flesh out your settings. They are the three things you don't want to be 1 or 2 dimensional at the end of the day. The characters, the plot, and the setting. Those are the 3 sort of linchpins, I would say. And so, yeah, that's the areas that you should sort of focus your research in order to flesh those out for the final product. So there we are. That is why research is so important, and that is the ways in which you can do proper justice to the research process and indeed end up, in theory anyway, with something that's interesting, engaging and unputdownable, as they say. And not to use any superlatives for my own work, of course, but if you would like to read something that a lot of people have been unable to put down, or so they've told me, head on over to Amazon, where you can, as ever, find my 2 books, The Berylford Scandals, Lust and Liberty, and Sin and Secrecy. They are both there for your purchase, whether in Kindle or in paperback format. And also, as ever, a reminder that the Dale Hurst Writing Show, my podcast, is available to listen on Spotify. We just released our 5th episode featuring the playwright Sebastian Gardner, where we talk about our projects, both of which feature Chopin in the title. Other than that, it's more of a Q&A with Sebastian Gardner about his play, which is in the middle of its regional tour. But other than that, though, don't forget to like and subscribe, especially to these videos. You get the full experience if you view via YouTube, as opposed to the previews that are available on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to skip ahead of all of those little previews and get right down to the full story, then subscribing is what you ought to do right now. Other than that, though, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening and viewing, and until next time, I'm Dale Hurst. Bye for now.